Hello, and thank you for letting me talk today. I want to talk about something I'm really, really passionate about. I do fun talks, but this is not so much fun, but I hope you really find it interesting and want to know more. Why do autistic and neurodivergent people need to know about Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, hypermobility spectrum disorders, joint hypermobility syndromes, and in education, health, and employment? Professor Graham once said, "There's no other condition in the history of modern medicine that has been neglected in such a way as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome." And I termed him godfather of EDS, but I would also say it's neglected by a lot of other people too. And I will quickly say why, on my case, I'm so passionate, but also why I'm passionate going on. Uh, Not all people with joint hypermobility syndromes or EDS are autistic or neurodivergent, but a lot are. So my story is I travelled a lot and had to return to secondary school back in England. I couldn't do handwriting. I found it really difficult, and I also didn't want to be the same as the others. It took me twice as long to do quite a lot of subjects. I had a lot of issues with my joints. I used to do party tricks, see how far I could bend. I had a lot of bloating, tummy issues, headaches, migraines, illnesses, and infections, often absent from school, more absent than being there, in fact. And at age 16, I achieved two qualifications. I thought everybody had my issues, and because I didn't realize it wasn't normal. After leaving school, I had a few jobs, but didn't really settle. And in fact, later on, became a nomad myself, traveling the world. I didn't really settle. I came back and got married and had children. Pregnancy was an issue, both from hormones and long labors and disasters with epidurals, anesthetics, and so on. My youngest was diagnosed social communication disorder and then autistic at a very young age and had medical issues a lot. And my youngest also had medical issues. Um, I was excluded with my child from playgroups, nursery schools, and primary schools, and we were labeled the refrigerator mother. I knew I had to try to help other people, and I wanted to stop being labeled that because I knew I wasn't. Um, so I walked into my local open university and asked to do a psych degree because I wanted to be an educational psychologist. Teachers were asking for help from me, and I didn't know what to do. And I knew I had to be educated. And they were very brave in letting me learn. I became a teaching assistant in special playgroups, primary, secondary schools. I finished my psych degree, actually won awards, and went on to do my teaching degree, which is what was needed. And I was the first to suggest that PGCE students had input on autism and other SEN in the course, so I was quite proud of that. I continued to have various illnesses all during this time, herniated discs, knee operations, and I was called the bendy lady. Um, so it was quite difficult. I worked in an autism epilepsy school, and during that time, the ed psych changed to the ed doctorate, and I was offered a place, but I was too ill at the time to accept, and I knew I wouldn't be able to do the travel and journey and study. I continued working as an advisory teacher for the county. I continued my advanced diploma in child development and my master's. In fact, I do remember receiving my master's qualification letter on on the morning I was actually made redundant, which was bizarre. Um, I became the lead educationalist for the largest autism charity UK wide and assistant head teacher working on the social model of autism education, and I worked UK wide. I also worked in all phases of education. Now, all this time, I kept having physical issues. I mean, my shoulder was out for nearly 2 years because I had not been believed, so I stopped going to the doctor. My back, same thing. I was not believed, and then eventually they did do MRIs, and they said, "Oh, yes, it really is not good." So, but we weren't believed, and because we have pain all the time, it's very hard for us to differentiate what is normal and what's not. And I never know, I still don't to this day, on the tick box 1 to 10 where you are on the scale. We have pain all the time is our normal, and I don't like to make fuss, but and then I'm guessing what they want to hear, so it doesn't work. Even with smiley faces, it really doesn't work. So that needs work. Hopefully, some things I'm working on too. I had to medically retire, unfortunately, and lose my career in 2015. Only then I received my Ehlers-Danlos diagnosis, and then was discharged because there is no diagnostic care pathway. I had to buy my doctor a book on Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. What other disease is so not believed than Ehlers-Danlos syndromes? I don't know. I was very ill for 2 years. I couldn't stabilize. In fact, my children wondered if I was dying and they didn't know what to say. I started a social enterprise to support people as I realized we needed ongoing, immediate support. And I also volunteered for the national charity. 2016, I decided to go for my autism diagnosis, even though I'd been told many, many times that it wasn't possible for educated, professional, middle-aged women to be autistic and have a family. I did get the diagnosis and I left, actually with no support again, because for what I wanted, there was nothing around. I do know now I'm not dim. I'm sad that I wasn't supported more, and I feel I could have done a lot more academically had I known or been supported in that. What I do know now is that we can't continue to ignore this and let other people follow this journey. Today's injuries and illnesses from neglect are tomorrow's chronically ill pain sufferers. And whether autistic or neurodivergent or not, this can't carry on. We do have more research, but we need a lot more, and we need a lot more interest from funders and researchers. So it's been around a long time, an awful long time. Hippocrates first mentioned it in 400 BC. Nomad warriors, he said, they had really lax joints, multiple scars. They were pretty useless, basically, holding a bow and arrow and being warriors. Um, and then Paganini was described as a rubber man, as he was very tall and thin with long, thin fingers. The three graces illustrate some hypermobility there. And Dr. Ehlers and Dr. Danlos first described it in 1901 and 1908. So they are heritable disorders, and it affects the connective tissue, and the connective tissue is defective and it's found throughout the body. There are many types, but by far the most common type is hypermobility Ehlers-Danlos syndromes and hypermobility spectrum disorders. For children, that would be joint hypermobility syndromes or symptomatic hypermobility. About 80%, maybe more, of people diagnosed have HEDS. There is no cure, and the most common type, HEDS, has no diagnostic test had no diagnostic test and no diagnostic care pathway. So why haven't we seen pupils with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or symptomatic hypermobility before? It might be because it's really hard to get a diagnosis. So it's considered a rare disease, which is about 1 in 5,000, roughly about that. If you think about autism, at least 30 years ago, that was considered a rare disease. It's not now. It's about 1 in 57 in the USA and 1 in 100 in the UK. So it is complex. It's multi-systemic. It's not an easy fix, and there's certainly no cure, and there's no genetic test for the most common type, and it can be visible and an invisible disability. Like myself, I was not believed. So it's quite difficult to pin down. Now, I've mentioned connective tissue. It is connective tissue is found throughout the body, and it works in specialized areas like the joints, cartilage, muscles, nerves, nervous system, bones, blood vessels. and it helps attach and stabilizes the muscles, the internal organs. It can actually surrounds our cells and is also found inside our cells. So connective tissue gives strength to each individual cell and allows them to function. And it's also now associated affecting the cardiovascular autonomic system, gastrointestinal system, and a special cell called the mast cells. And I often quote this with a bit of flourishment now. Connective tissue is the equivalent of building a house with cement, holding the bricks and so on together. If mixed in the right quantities, the house is stable. But if some is in the wrong quantities, you will have a very wonky house. Bits won't hold up as well as others, and they'll be unreliable to say the least. And if you add in the different bits of weight, like added sofas, chairs, beds, different temperatures and conditions, what happens then? What will happen to the house? And then you have to think about the electrics and waterworks in the house. What happens next? Boom, basically. I did quite like saying that. These are just some of the symptoms and conditions you will find with these. I can't cover them all or do them justice in this short session. So this is not complete. And what you need to know is that everybody is unique and presents differently. Our issues also vary and flare, which makes it even more complex for the individual and for the carers and professional allied people. We do know, sensory-wise, that people with symptomatic hypermobility have more issues with proprioception, vestibular sense, and interoception. And understanding these bodily feelings can help interpret what's going on inside the body. But it is more difficult with symptomatic hypermobility, as the body and brain is behaving differently to other people. Now, if a pupil child also has co-occurring conditions like dyspraxia or autistic, then this can lead to further confusion, recognizing the emotions and sensations. These inner senses are hyperarousal to things such as pain, hunger, thirst, itchiness, temperature issues, and so on. So what does this mean for the children? We know that for pupils will have poor attainment and poor attendance. So the poor attainment, the brain fog, which happens, lots of self-esteem for not being there, poor attendance because they're not in the school, they're seeing medical practitioners outside, they're ill quite a lot of the time, they're never going to get a full attendance star. There's so many issues here, which I talk about at length otherwise. So, and the other thing is physical health is just not thought about in this area. We know that parents and carers, pupils, and a lot of educators who do know about it have been calling out for a toolkit or something like this for a long, long time. And so have I. In some cases, it might be that pupils are not believed that their bruising, injury, or illness is due to Ehlers-Danlos or symptomatic hypermobility. And as these issues are not even really known about, and also due to the difficulty of getting a diagnosis anyway, they have to ask the parents and carers about the cause of this trauma, as legally required to do. But the parents and carers are often bewildered themselves because it might be their normal because it's heritable. They get it all the time, or they don't have an explanation. They don't know why these sort of rashes, or they can't eat, or whatever is happening, and therefore it can cause even further issues and misunderstanding. So Ehlers-Danlos syndromes and joint hypermobility syndromes are heritable. Again, there are a lot of symptoms here with gastrointestinal issues, which I won't go into, but I would say that I can tell you personally, the fear of constant pain when eating food, constant vomiting, so your esophagus, throat, and mouth are burning, bloating in the stomach, pseudo-asthma, coughing, does really make you fear food every time you try and eat it. And then the following wheals and rashes, something related to mast cell activation disorder, low blood pressure, feeling generally unwell, really, really shaky, hyperglycemic, itchy, and also sometimes can lead to anaphylaxis. So no wonder we can't eat and don't want to eat sometimes. So that's one area I would like to look at further, and I can't do it justice in this session. Girls and boys are both equally affected by Ehlers-Danlos syndromes and joint hypermobility syndromes. But we do know girls start becoming more symptomatic at puberty, and obviously the hormones could play a part in this. So boys and testosterone builds up muscle mass, and muscles keep our musculoskeletal ligaments and bones together, and so therefore maybe overcomes the natural tendency of laxity. With the girls, progesterone in particular seems to make our symptoms worse before and coming up to menstruation. And this can lead to more joint issues, joint pain, dizziness, and so on. And therefore, even more heavily painful periods and during other cycles of pregnancy and menopause. We also know that estrogen tends to stabilize the collagen. If you're taking a contraceptive pill, like a progesterone only one, and you are symptomatic hypermobility diagnosed, you might want to think about that more or get more advice, because that is an issue. And in pregnancy, we know increased levels of relaxin, as the name suggests, really, can increase pain in the sacroiliac joint, lower back and pelvic area. But it is needed, obviously, but that's why often a lot of people get more issues there at that time. So menopause, again, is a big hit on many, many people. HRT may protect the symptoms of Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, but there's simply not enough research to know. Dysautonomia is used to describe the autonomic nervous system not working correctly. Lots of people can get issues with dysautonomia, not just EDSs, but there's a particular area where this is more apparent. The ANS does its business without us having to consciously think about it, like breathing, heartbeats, digestion, bladder control. The sympathetic system does the blood pressure, heart rate, and is responsible for our fight and flight responses. So in response to any perceived threat response to the body. This is, for example, when we're faced with a possible life-threatening situation, or might not be. For me, it is still hairy, muscly spiders. When we get increased adrenaline to deal with the threat, we get differences in our blood pressure, our heart rate, trouble breathing, and so on. So the sympathetic nervous system overloads or over-responses and compensates too much with added adrenaline. And this can lead to fluctuations in the heart rate and blood pressure, as well as respiratory and gastrointestinal issues. So the interesting part here is that the sympathetic nervous system actually can mimic symptoms of anxiety that are an anxiety disorder, which is actually physical. So one of the triggers I mentioned before is stress, which can lead to heart and blood pressure. For me now, I can feel when it is happening, I can hear it, and I can feel it. Unfortunately, there isn't much I can do about it, but knowing why it is happening perhaps lessens the most extreme reactions I have had in the past. So management of physical anxiety may be, or as well as needs a different approach than that of other approaches at the moment to do with anxiety. There's a lot more there, an awful lot. You could do whole sessions on this. So again, why is this not diagnosed? Well, medically unexplained symptoms bias. When I was working in schools, nearly all my cases were boys, and later on, I had some girls, not many. And diagnosis in girls and women is rare, particularly then, and it is for women now of my age. So I'm, getting on. But everything was always about autism, boys, dyspraxia, and ADHD. and then they had all these other symptoms as well. Now, I think that all the research has been male bias dominated, and the same with Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. It's very complex. There's no cure. It's been around an awful long time, but we just don't seem to be recognized. I would say that. I would say neglected, or possibly there's so much disinterest because it's been around and it's just one of those things that girls get or women get. Is interesting. School attendance. We know pupils have poor attendance and poor attainment in school. I was looking at the emotional-based school avoidance figures. So this isn't formal exclusions, it's also informal exclusions as well. Not all children and young people on the SEND register are attending or attaining in school due to what is first perceived as emotional anxiety. But bearing in mind what I said about the dysautonomia, maybe it's also physical. Maybe it might be worth studying neurodivergent pupils to see if they are hypermobile in the future, or screening them. These could be areas to be investigated. And please contact me because I would love to get involved. EBSA evidence does document somatic pain, headaches, stomach aches, poor digestion, bowel issues, tiredness, muscle rigidity, racy beating heart as symptoms of anxiety due to emotional anxiety. Although it might be correct in some, emotional interoception is affected and the physical issues of this are not considered. Also, as people with hypermobility syndrome are overrepresented with anxiety in the population, that can be associated with abnormal autonomic reactivity. The research for all this is at the back in the references, most of it anyway, not great at references, sorry. And Dr. Eccles is leading in this area. And part of the study she's done is joint hypermobility. People are 16 times more likely to have panic or anxiety disorders. And hypermobility is also linked to other disorders like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and irritable bowel syndrome. So many issues here, and I've talked about them for many years and do sessions on this. But again, physical health issues are missed due to misdiagnosis. So we have the Equality Act 2010, which is fantastic. But we have reasonable adjustments. Great. But if you don't have a diagnosis and you're not believed to have it and you're actually disbelieved to have it, what can you do? You're left to meander in the fogginess of not knowing whether you're actually still making it up, and the post-traumatic stress of not being believed by anyone and not even yourself. So you don't trust yourself. Now, if that isn't discombobulation, I don't know what it is, and I do love that word. Statistically, more children are homemade with hypermobility syndromes, and they're also neurodivergent. They're missing from school. If the parents' carers are in work or the young person, adult, is in work, they usually have poor health there. They might lose their job. Very often they do, unfortunately. So there's more poverty, and it's heritable, so the children will have it. So circles of disbelief lead to more issues, and the physical leads to mental. A lot of post-traumatic stress disorder will continue there. It's all in our heads so many times. I've heard that. I've had other members say it so many times. And the trauma and loneliness of not being believed continues. This has to change. So I'm really delighted that this is happening. It's needed. We know so many teachers, carers, allied professionals, pupils and parents and carers want this, and the charities as well, of course. But there hasn't been the funding to do it. I've been trying to do it on my own for a while, but it doesn't work. It's always better to be joined up. I strongly believe in that. And you've heard my story, and I've tried to show you what is happening around from my members nationally, what I hear about, and all the other pupils I hear about. I hope it resonates with some of the pupils that you teach or you know, or children you know, your family, friends, and maybe even yourself. This will be free, it will be online, and it's not perfect, I'm afraid to say. It's been really, really difficult in COVID year trying to get this done at all, and it's been quite hard. But I'm delighted to lead on the content, and it will be added to as we go along. So thank you so much. This is how to contact me if you need to, or get in touch with myself or the other leading charities. And the references are here. Thank you very much.